like any real person, he was a multifaceted person and a great leader. So there are lots of different sides of him which are also important for us to look at. As part of that, we have been not only organizing a series of lectures, but we have also been doing a lot of performances. For example, with Swarnya Iyer, we did this Dastan-e-Nehru with the Dastan Goi collective. We've also created a puppetry series with a organization that works in Lamhi, which is where Premchand was born. A small puppet theater group, and they've created a long series on Nehru, together it can formulate a feature-length film. And then, of course, we have Nehru Dialogues with Purvanandji, under which we are not confined to only talking about Nehru, but also a lot of other values that are relevant to contemporary discourse. As part of all of this, I'm very, very happy to welcome today our two speakers on this talk, which is titled Nehru, Unsung Hero of INA Trials. One of the, the best thing about, the job that I'm doing right now is to introduce people who need no introduction. So it's very easy for me to just name them and invite them because both of them are so well known and so eminent in their own ways. So I would like to invite the author of the book, The Trial That Shook Britain, How a Court-Martial Hastened Acceptance of Indian Independence, Mr. Ashish Ray. Please give him a big round of applause. And a very, very renowned historian, Professor Nadla Mukherjee, is also here to chair the session today. So I welcome you both. And now, let's not make you wait for even a moment, and let's move to the speakers for the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ankush. Am I audible to all of you? Okay. Well, let me begin by saying that I'm delighted to be here today to be in conversation with Ashish Ray, who's been doing this absolutely wonderful work in the last few years on Netaji and issues associated with Netaji Subhash Bose. And this book, which we are going to be talking about today, after he's given his talk, The Trial That Shook Britain, has just come out a few months ago. And the Indian edition is even more recent. And I'm really happy that audiences in Delhi will get to hear and know about this book and also buy it. It's available outside. We have this opportunity to do so. And I'm very thankful to the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation for inviting me to chair this meeting today and be able to be part of your Nehru dialogues, which I think are extremely important series that you have launched. I'm also delighted to introduce Mr. Ashish Ray to this audience. He's a long-time journalist, been in the profession for more than 50 years now. And he has, oh, sorry. You can't hear me? Oh, hold it close. He's been in the profession for more than 50 years now. He has broadcast on the BBC, on the ITN, on CNN. He headed the CNN network for a long time. He's been heading the Foreign Correspondents Association in Europe for a number of years. And as I just said in the beginning, he earlier did two books on cricket, which I was not aware of. But these two books, which he did in the last one, Laid to Rest, which was on the whole controversy surrounding Netaji's death, and then this one, which is more recently he's done, The Trial That Shook Britain, which is about the INA trials which were held in Delhi in late 1945. And I look forward to discussing with him various aspects of the book after we've heard his talk. And I'm also really happy the subject that he's chosen today for his lecture, Nehru, the unsung hero of the INA trials, because in fact, it was a very dramatic episode in Nehru's life as well. As he tells you in this book, how many people remember that, in fact, after a gap of more than 25 years, Nehru wore his lawyer's robes and actually appeared on behalf of the defense in their INA trials. It was a symbolic gesture. He was not the main lawyer. Bhulabhai Desai was the main lawyer. But the fact that somebody who was right at the top in the leadership of the Indian national movement actually appeared formally as a lawyer for Netaji was symbolic of the fact that the Indian National Congress and the people of India were solidly behind the whole issue of what was being defended in the INA trials. And I think that symbolic importance of the gesture which Nehru made, apart from much else that he did. In fact, as Ashish Ray has shown us in this book, more than anyone else, it was Nehru who popularized the idea of justice for the INA prisoners in the country. And that's what this book is about. This book it has a part on the INA, what actually happened in the INA. It's one chapter. But the book is about the trial, and the book is about the consequences of the trial, the impact that the trial had on the Indian national movement, the impact it had on the mass movement, and the impact it had also on the breaking out of the naval mutiny in February 1946, and whether all this added up to hastening the onset of Indian independence. That's the basic theme that this book talks about. So over to Ashish.
I think we can go back to the first slide, and I'll indicate to you as and when we need to change. I'm afraid you'll have to be near the laptop. But Madam Chairperson, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I do see distinguished people in the audience. I see a former Cabinet Minister, Manishankar Iyer. I also see Professor Aditya Mukherjee, a distinguished historian, and we also have two relatives of those who were accused in the trial that I'm about to talk about. One is right here in front of me, Anisa Puri, daughter of Prem Sehgal. And we have Adil Shahnawaz, who is the grandson of Shahnawaz Khan. And I must also, I suppose, say that there are two granddaughters of Sharat Chandra Bose present here, Sharmila Bose and Piyali Ray. So, before I come to the topic of Jawaharlal Nehru's role in connection with the 1945-46 trials of soldiers of Subhash Bose's Indian National Army, or the INA, allow me to address the matter of the relationship between these two stalwarts of the Indian National Congress. This is important, indeed essential, as a malicious disinformation campaign has been waged for decades, especially in the past 10 to 11 years, about the subject by various vested interests. The purpose, it would appear, has been to malign Nehru and misrepresent Bose. Bose, like Nehru, was a Cambridge-educated, charismatic, left-wing patriot. During his 2 decades of active service to the Congress, Bose rose impressively through the party's ranks to be elected at age 41 as one of its youngest presidents. Nehru and Bose were on the same page on social and economic matters. Their goals were identical, and that was the freedom of India. If they differed, such differences were on the means to achieve the end. This was perfectly healthy and democratic. Bose advocated use of force over and above Gandhian nonviolence. Nehru had concerns about this. More to the point, what the false propaganda factories have deliberately or out of ignorance overlooked is the special personal relationship between Nehru and the Bose family. Between 1927 and 1945, almost every time Nehru visited Kolkata, he stayed at the residence of Subhash's elder brother, Sarat, who was Subhash's mentor, a brilliant barrister, a member of the Congress Working Committee, leader of the Congress Parliamentary Party in the Central Assembly, and a cabinet minister in the interim government before Indian independence. When Subhash's half-Austrian Vienna-based daughter, Anita, as an 18-year-old visited Delhi for the first time in the winter of 1960-61, guess where she stayed? At Teen Murti House, of course, as a house guest at the official residence of Prime Minister Nehru. Nehru and Bose were comrades in a sacred cause. In June 1935, while Nehru was imprisoned in India, his wife, Kamala, had to be rushed to Europe for treatment of tuberculosis. Bose was then exiled in Europe. As would be natural between friends, Bose took charge by accompanying Kamala from Vienna to Prague, where she was to receive medical care. With Kamala's condition deteriorating, British authorities allowed Nehru to join her. Bose wrote to Nehru, quote, "If I can be of any service in your present trouble, I hope you will not hesitate to send for me," unquote. Kamala was moved to Lausanne in Switzerland for further attention. Here, she prematurely passed away in 1936 in the presence of her husband, daughter Indira, and Subhash. Nehru returned to India to preside over the Lucknow All India Congress Committee session in 1936. Corresponding with him, Bose said, quote, "Among the front-rank leaders of today, you are the only one whom we can look up to for leading the Congress in a progressive direction," unquote. In 1938, Bose himself was unanimously elected as Congress president. He formed a planning committee on the Soviet model and invited Nehru to be its chairman. As Bose's term progressed, Gandhians and the Congress's right wing increasingly opposed a second term for him. Vallabhbhai Patel urged Bose to step down and permit Dr. Pattavi Sitaramaiah to become president the following year. As a storm gathered, the Nobel Prize-winning poet Rabindranath Tagore wrote to Gandhi asking him to renominate Bose. Gandhi, addressing Tagore as respected guru, replied it would be better for Bose not to run. Bose himself said he won't contest if another leftist would. This did not happen. So he stood for re-election and won. The unthinkable had happened. Gandhi's will hadn't prevailed over the Congress. Gandhi stated, quote, "Since I was instrumental in inducing Dr. Pattavi not to withdraw, the defeat is more mine than his," unquote. In contrast, Bose was conciliatory. He enumerated, quote, "It will be a tragic thing for me if I succeed in winning the confidence of other people, but fail to win the confidence of India's greatest man," unquote. At his second anointing as Congress president, Bose was missing from the podium, struck by pneumonia. In his absence, Govind Ballabh Pant moved a resolution binding Bose to select a working committee, quote, in accordance with the wishes of Gandhiji, unquote. This was unacceptable to Bose. Now followed an emotional exchange of letters between Bose and Nehru. On the 28th of March, 1939, Bose wrote, quote, I find that for some time past you have developed tremendous dislike for me. I say this because I find that you take up enthusiastically every possible point against me. What could be said in my favor, you ignore. What my political opponents urge against me, you concede, while you are almost blind to what could be said against them, unquote. On 3rd April 1939, Nehru replied, your letter is essentially an indictment of my conduct and an investigation into my failings. So far as the failings are concerned, or many of them at any rate, I have little to say. I plead guilty to them, well realizing that I have the misfortune to possess them, unquote. Bose further wrote, quote, on my side, ever since I came out of internment in 1937, I have been treating you with the utmost regard and consideration, in private life and in public. I have looked upon you as politically an elder brother and leader, and have often sought your advice, unquote. Nehru responded, quote, I entirely appreciate the truth of your remark that ever since you came out of internment in 1937, you have treated me with the utmost regard and consideration, in private as well as in public life. I'm grateful to you for this. Personally, I have always had and still have regard and affection for you, though sometimes I did not like at all what you did or how you did it. To some extent, I suppose, we are temperamentally different, and our approach to life and its problems is not the same, unquote. Bose added in his letter, quote, if I have used harsh language or hurt your feelings at any place, kindly pardon me. You yourself say that there is nothing like frankness, and I have tried to be frank, perhaps brutally frank. Nehru reciprocated, quote, frankness hurts often enough, but it is almost always desirable, especially between those who have to work together, unquote. Both signed off their letters with a quote, yours affectionately, unquote. Nehru expressed the view that the Mahatma should accept Bose as president. He said, quote, to try to push him out seems to me to be an exceedingly wrong step, unquote. At a special meeting of the AICC in Kolkata on the 29th of April 1939, Bose was set to step down as Congress president. Nehru moved a motion calling on Bose to withdraw his resignation. He suggested the working committee from the previous year be retained, barring 2 members who be replaced by names chosen by Bose. This did not meet Bose's expectation. He wanted greater left representation in the committee, so he resigned. In short, when Gandhians and the Congress's right wing were hounding out Bose, a democratically elected Congress president, it was Nehru who not only described it as an exceedingly wrong step, but offered a compromise formula for Bose's continuance as president. After he resigned as Congress president, Bose formed Forward Bloc, a pressure group under the Congress umbrella, to consolidate progressive forces. The now right-dominated working committee under the interim presidentship of Dr. Rajendra Prasad retaliated by barring Bose from holding any elected office in the Congress for 3 years. Bose reacted by saying, I shall, quote, I shall cling to the Congress with even greater devotion than before, and shall go on serving the Congress and the country as a servant of the nation, unquote. His INA brigades were named after Gandhi, Nehru, and Maulana Azad. In a radio broadcast from Myanmar on the eve of the INA's first campaign, he sought Gandhi's blessings. In one such broadcast, he addressed him as, quote, father of the nation, unquote. After provincial elections in India in the winter of 1936-37, the Congress was in a commanding position in the Indian political scene. They were in government in 8 out of India's then 11 provinces and enjoyed respectable presences in the other 3 provinces as well, namely Bengal, Punjab, and Sindh. However, in September 1939, Britain declared war against Germany and dragged India into the conflict. The Congress objected to this, but the British Viceroy, Lord Victor Linlithgow, refused to discuss the matter with the Congress. Therefore, in protest, the Congress governments resigned in all the 8 provinces. The party thereby voluntarily vacated their predominant all-India position on a matter of principle. For a few months in 1942, the Congress struggle was reignited in the form of the Quit India movement, but this was brutally suppressed by the British. Most Congress leaders and many of its workers were imprisoned, and the organization was officially banned for the remainder of the Second World War. In effect, for the greater part of 6 years between 1939 and 1945, the Indian freedom movement, which was essentially the Congress struggle, was either relatively or completely dormant. I went to the University of Oxford as an academic visitor to explore an evidence-based answer to the question as to how the Indian freedom movement was revived after the Second World War. The outcome was a thesis-length paper now published as a book by Routledge entitled The Trial That Shook Britain: How a Court-Martial Hastened Acceptance of Indian Independence. Gandhi said, quote, the hypnotism of the Indian National Army has cast its spell on us. Netaji's name is one to conjure with. His patriotism is second to none. His bravery shines through all his actions, unquote. He further stated, quote, though the INA failed in their immediate objective, they have a lot to their credit of which they might well be proud. The greatest among these was to gather together under one banner men from all religions and races of India and infuse into them the spirit of solidarity and oneness to the utter exclusion of all communal and parochial sentiment. In course of my research, I discovered that while Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Sehgal, and Gurbakhsh Dhillon, the 3 former British-commanded Indian Army officers charged with treason in the first, most famous, and game-changing trial of INA soldiers, undoubtedly emerged as national heroes, there were other heroes as well. General Sir Claude Auchinleck, Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces in India, quickly grasped the seriousness of the situation. Khan, Sehgal, and Dhillon were sentenced to life imprisonments, but Auchinleck, as confirming officer, overruled the verdict. He told general officer commanding-in-chiefs under him that, quote, any attempt to enforce the sentence would have led to chaos in the country at large and probably mutiny and dissension in the army, culminating in its dissolution, unquote. Clement Attlee, the British Prime Minister, too, sensed the gravity of the circumstances. Eventually, on the 15th of March 1946, he stated in the British House of Commons, "It is no good applying the formulas of the past to the present. The temperature of 1946 is not the temperature of 1920 or of 1930 or even of 1942, unquote. He continued, I am certain that at the present time, the tide of nationalism is running very fast in India. That national idea has spread right through, and not least perhaps among those soldiers who have done such wonderful service in the war, unquote. Attlee could not have been clearer that the INA phenomenon had disturbed the devotion of Indian soldiers in the British services. Then there was the irrepressible Bhulabhai Desai, the Congress lawyer who defended the three accused in the trial. He argued, quote, it is not at all a case of what you might call three individuals waging war against the king. These men charged before you were a part of an organized army which waged war against the king. What is now on trial before the court is the right to wage war with immunity on the part of a subject race for their liberation, unquote. He kept Indians transfixed for 2 months with his gripping arguments and cross-examinations, stirring people to a boiling point. He lost in the courtroom, as a charge of treason under the Indian Army Act could only result in a death penalty or jail for life, but prevailed in the court of public opinion. He swayed a section of Britons in the Indian armed forces and persuaded Auchinleck himself to change his mind. And then there was Jawaharlal Nehru. The Congress had previously harbored reservations about Bose's alliance with Japan, but the lifting of censorship on Indian media after the end of the Second World War in August 1945 meant that the INA's audacious attempt to free India by force could no longer be concealed from Indians. They reacted hysterically to what they interpreted as dauntless heroism. By October 1945, Nehru was in every oration at mass gatherings, urging the crowd to cry Jai Hind and Chalo Delhi, slogans coined by Bose, which had gone viral. He met INA men and was impressed. He wrote to V.K. Krishnamenon, who headed the India League, which lobbied for Indian independence in London, about the INA soldiers, saying, quote, they are brave, stout-hearted, and capable, and very politically minded, unquote. Campaigning for the 1946 elections to the central and provincial legislative assemblies, which began in early October, received an enthusiastic public response, with demands at rallies to hear stories of the heroic deeds of the INA. On 9th of October 1945, the British Viceroy of India, Lord Archibald Wavell, in a private and secret message to the Secretary of State for India in London, Lord Frederick Pethick Lawrence, said, quote, Nehru is very bitter against the British regime in India and against the Muslim League, and the adoption for the election campaign of the INA war cries is significant. Nehru's uncompromising attitude implies that he is not opposed to a violent mass movement of some kind, unquote. Wavell also informed Pethick Lawrence, quote, "This is the first occasion on which an anti-British politician, Bose, has acquired a hold over a substantial number of men in the Indian Army, and the consequences are quite incalculable," unquote. A secret note sent by the director of the Indian Intelligence Bureau, Sir Norman Smith, to the political department of the India office in London said, quote, "At most of the 160 political meetings held in the central provinces during the first half of October, demands were made for the abandonment of action against the INA. Similar demands were made at many meetings in other provinces. At a speech in Bombay, Nehru publicly referred to INA as the soldiers of independence," unquote. Auchinleck would have preferred to keep the Red Fort trial out of politics. He couldn't. As far as Nehru and the Congress were concerned, the closer the connection, the better. Intriguingly, on the day Desai rose to mount his defense, Auchinleck received Nehru. This was an unusual gesture. A commander-in-chief of imperial armed forces entertaining a relentless opponent of empire, especially when Nehru was in an overtly implacable mood. The London Times carried an Associated Press report which said, quote, "He, Nehru, said that stories of exploits of the Indian National Army had led many younger Indians to question the Gandhi philosophy of nonviolence. Many among them were now thinking about the possibility of force as a means of gaining independence. It was the subject of much thought and discussion among Congress party leaders," unquote. The Hindu reported that Nehru was asked by the press, quote, "Do you think that failure to punish the INA officers might result in a weakening of the morale of the members of the Indian Army who did not join the INA?" unquote. Nehru replied, quote, "On the contrary, I feel that the army is keenly interested in seeing that the INA people are not punished," unquote. Nehru also disclosed that, quote, "Contributions to the Congress's Defense Committee Fund are coming from the ranks of the Indian Army to support the defense of the INA members," unquote. Before the trial began, Nehru went to meet the under-trial trio. Sehgal said to him, quote, "Look, Panditji, if you have any embarrassment about the Congress not believing in violence and that sort of thing," Nehru interrupted him to emphatically say he did not have any embarrassment. 2 days before Khan, Sehgal, and Dhillon's trial began on the 5th of November, 1945, Wavell invited Nehru to meet him. The Viceroy reported to his boss, Pethick Lawrence, quote, "In order to make sure that there is no misunderstanding, I saw Nehru on the 3rd of November and pointed out to him the danger of the course he and other leaders were advocating. He made it clear that he thought violence inevitable, and shortly after our interview delivered an inflammatory speech of the usual kind," unquote. He added, quote, "I believe that the Congress are counting on the INA as the spearhead of their revolt. They would suborn the Indian Army if they could, and they hope that their threats will impair the loyalty and efficiency of the police, unquote. The American historian Peter Fay described the opening day of the trial in his book, The Forgotten Army, thus: "The accused appeared in khakis, but without badges of rank. Oaths were administered. Before they sat down, they turned and gave Nehru a smart salute." On the 6th of November, 1945, the issue of the Hindustan Times reported, quote, "A trial unprecedented in British Indian history, whose significance was heightened by the fact that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru donned after 25 years his barrister's gown and white band as a defense counsel, opened today in a large room on the second floor of a barrack in the historic Red Fort of Delhi," unquote. On the 12th of February, 1946, Auchinleck circulated a comprehensive, strictly personal and secret 6-page paper to GOC&Cs under him. Quote, "I have no doubt at all," he said, "that to have confirmed the sentence of imprisonment would have had disastrous results, in that it would have probably precipitated a violent outbreak throughout the country and have created active and widespread disaffection in the army," unquote. Moti Ram, an enterprising journalist cum publisher, brought out the transcript of the trial within weeks of it concluding. He requested Nehru to write a foreword to the book. Nehru inimitably inscribed, quote, "No trial in India, either by court-martial or in the civil courts, has attracted so much public attention or has dealt with issues of such fundamental national importance. Those 3 officers and the Indian National Army became symbols of India fighting for her independence. It became in reality a trial of strength between the will of the Indian people and the will of those who hold power in India. And it was the will of the Indian people that triumphed in the end," unquote. 800 INA soldiers had been shortlisted for court-martial. Eventually, less than 20 underwent court-martial. That too, with the charge of treason withdrawn. The exercise was finally called off on the 2nd of May, 1946. Despite being in the midst of talks with the British cabinet mission, which had come from London, Nehru wrote a lengthy letter to Auchinleck. He stated, and thereby placed on record for posterity, quote, "It is sometimes said that we, the Congress, have exploited this INA situation for political purposes. But I can say with some confidence that there was no desire to or even thought of exploiting the INA issue for political purposes when this matter first came before the public. The sole thought before me was that thousands of my countrymen, INA personnel who had been detained, whom I believed to be patriotic, were in grave danger. I had differed with them in the past on international and national issues. Nevertheless, I felt kinship and sympathy for these people. Then a strange and surprising thing happened. Not strange in itself, but very surprising because of its depth and extent. Within a few weeks of the story of the INA had percolated to the remotest villages in India, and everywhere there was admiration for them and apprehension as to their possible fate. No political organization, however strong and efficient, could have produced this enormous reaction in India. The widespread popular enthusiasm was surprising enough, but even more surprising was a similar reaction of a very large number of regular Indian Army officers and men. Something had touched them deeply. I suppose everyone who's given thought to the matter realizes fully that it is a dangerous and risky business to break the discipline of an army. Risks have to be taken sometimes, more especially when existing conditions are felt to be intolerable, unquote. And there, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. I think we have a fair idea of not only the scope of the arguments in the book, but also the background which Ashish has very kindly put together before us, which gives us a context of the Indian freedom struggle, the important developments, especially in relation to Subhash Bose. And that's the context in which he has presented his facts and then developed his particular arguments. So I think we can now have a discussion on the book, and I can begin by asking you about some issues. And I think it's always good to begin with some disagreement, so that the debate gets interesting. Not because I disagree with the conclusions that your book, but let me just take up a few issues. I think in the building up to your argument, for example, your first chapter is about armed resistance in India against the British from 1857 onwards, and you take up the Great Revolt of 1857. You then take up the Gadar, and you also take up the whole tradition of the revolutionary movement, the individual violence or small group violence tradition, which was exemplified by Surya Sen and Bhagat Singh, Anushilan, Jugantar, etc. So these are the three strands. You devote a whole chapter to these to create a context for the INA. So my first question to you is, why did you think it was necessary to focus on the history of the armed resistance of different kinds? The Gadar was a very different ballgame. Here they were talking about large-scale revolt, and at least a few thousand people were involved in the revolt that happened in Punjab. Some 4,000 were put into jail, some 100 were hanged, and all that. And of course, the Great Revolt of 1857 involved at least people in their lakhs, hundreds of thousands of people, and including the suppression. And then there was the individual group violence. We no longer call it terrorist violence, but, why do you think you want to place INA in that line? Is it only because you want to distinguish it from the non-violent stream of the Indian national movement? And my question, I'll just elaborate this, because Bose himself emerges very much from within the broad stream of the non-violent struggle. After all, he joins, right from the non-cooperation movement onwards, he's very much a part of the mainstream Congress. His whole career is as built up as a congressman. Even his work, when he and Nehru joined hands in the late 20s to build the youth leagues, for example. It's all work which they do as congressmen, And in the 30s as well, then he comes back from the long exile, comes back to the presidentship of the Congress, and that too at a very young age. He was mayor again, So what I mean is that Bose himself does not emerge out of either Gadar tradition or the revolutionary tradition of Bengal, of which he's accused of, but he actually, there is no evidence that Bose was ever involved with Jugantar or Anushilan or the Surya Sen group or any of that. So his is a very different trajectory. And also his differences which emerge from 38, 39 after the second round of presidentship is denied, they are still within a certain framework, which is there. There are differences all along, as you said, with Nehru, with Patel. Within the Congress, there were always differences. The break comes because he goes away. He flees from India. And then he goes and seeks support from the Axis powers. Now, that's a very different, it's a different jump altogether from the entire policy which he too and the Congress have followed, because the line had been, even though we will not support Britain actively in this war because they're not even asking us, but broadly we are sympathetic with the aims of the democratic world against fascists. So here is a break of a very different kind. And then, of course, going to Japan and all that. So I'm just trying to think, why do you think it was necessary to draw the linkages with the tradition of the armed resistance? Because to me, what is distinctive about INA is not only that it was an armed resistance, but it was a break of a very different kind, an ideological break in a sense. But then later on, as he makes clear himself, he still very much identifies with Gandhi, with Nehru, with Maulana Azad, with the broader struggle for freedom. And he sees his moving away and taking help from the Axis powers, not as giving up his ideological commitment to the broad democratic ideals, though there may be differences on that. So this is my first question.
Well, first of all, I think, is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was greatly inspired by the 1857 movement, and so much so that when he went to Rangoon, he went to Bahadur Shah Zafar's grave, and eyewitnesses have reported that he cried inconsolably. So he was, from a young age, inspired by that. The second is, as you rightly said, that he was accused, but this was never established in court, of having association with revolutionaries in Bengal. But he was certainly sympathetic towards them. And thirdly, I cite the example of the Gadar movement because that was an international movement. And therefore, what I say, and these are all very brief references because they are all in one chapter. I make references to them to make the point that he derived inspiration and ideas from these three events in Indian history since and including 1857. So that's one. And then, as you very correctly said, he was very much part of the mainstream movement. And I would say that his finest hour was to be elected president of the Congress and to be re-elected president of the Congress. Thereafter is where a debatable chapter of his life emerges. He, of course, escapes from India. And so the moment he escapes from India and he arrives in Germany and lives there for 2 years nearly and seeks German support for Indian independence, it becomes very difficult for him to return to India. So that's one. And I am critical about his approaches to Nazi Germany. I've made that very clear in my book. But it happened, and therefore it was a situation where for him to come back would have meant certain imprisonment, if not worse. So returning to India was not an option. Japan was certainly more supportive, sympathetic to his quest for freedom, and he had been toying with this idea of using force over and above nonviolence, and therefore he saw this as an opportunity. The INA was formed, as you know, in 1942, before Bose arrived in Southeast Asia in 1943. Right. But that force had almost fizzled out. But the arrival of Bose in Southeast Asia in 1943 rejuvenated the INA and inspired the same officers and men to fight for India's liberation. And that, again, was a situation where he had no option of coming back to India. I personally believe that the INA campaign itself did not have a great prospect of success because the INA was not fully equipped. That's the first point. In terms of arms, in terms of food supplies, in terms of medical support. And most importantly, the INA campaign was 2 years too late. Because in 1942, the Japanese were right on top. By 1944, when the first INA campaign took place, the Japanese were on the defensive. The tide of war had changed. So you could say that he did not have an option to come back. Now, to return to the point that you made, that it was an ideological difference. He was a mainstream politician who had an ideological difference because he wanted to turn the Congress more into a left organization than what it was. And that's where he came up against a resistance. So with this suspension that was imposed on him of 3 years, and then he was sent to prison, it was career-wise, political career-wise, a cul-de-sac in India. And so he had this option of escaping, and he did. And there was possibly a personal reason for him to leave the country because of the fact that his partner was Austrian, and they had been apart for quite some time. But he also saw an opportunity which, in my view, didn't really exist because Adolf Hitler was not sympathetic to Indian independence.
Let me just take you back to a statement you made a couple of sentences back where you said that the differences were ideological and he did want to take the Congress in a more leftist direction, which is what he was being prevented from doing. If I may argue here, Jawaharlal Nehru was also very much, in many ways, I would say that he was much more avowedly a Marxist socialist than Bose ever was. Bose's ideas of socialism were very different. Many people have argued that they were, also deeply influenced by some notions he had of Indian traditions, Samyavad, etc., etc. I'm not going into that. But what I mean is that there were others in India, including Jawaharlal Nehru, including the Congress socialists, including the communists, who were, and Bose he came to the presidentship just as Nehru did before him in 36 and 37, consecutively for 2 years, on that wave of a rising left-wing consciousness among the politically active sections in India. So I do not believe that the crucial difference with Gandhiji was ideological. That Gandhiji was not socialist was there, but the difference between him and Bose is not, because Gandhiji's that difference Gandhiji had with everybody else who was on the left. to the extent that he had it. And he didn't have it with Bose any more than he had with JP or Lohia or Aruna Asaf Ali, all of whom cooperated in the Quit India movement a few years later. As I understand it, and you have quoted our book on Indian struggle very extensively, and we've argued this in that book, that the real difference between him and Gandhiji was not so much, it was not on ideology, it was on strategy. Bose was very keen on starting a mass struggle against the British immediately. That was his agenda. Whereas Gandhi...
In 1939, as a matter of fact.
Yes. So, but Gandhiji was deeply convinced that the time had not yet come for a mass struggle and that we had to build up to it. And as you know, that even in 1939, when the Congress actually resigned from all the provincial governments to protest against being pushed into the war without their consent, even then, Gandhiji did not go in for, the Congress did not go in for a mass struggle immediately. In fact, to decide what should happen, I'd like to quote this instance. Even though Bose had been formally banned from Congress office, the meeting that was held in Wardha in October 1939, to discuss what the line the Congress should take with the government, Bose was a special invitee and invited by Gandhiji himself to a meeting of the Congress Working Committee.
Yes.
So I think it's also very interesting to see that how, though formally lines were drawn, but at the same time, I'll also like to quote to you when there was a conflict in the Bengal Congress Committee, and Bose was, there were two groups and they were contesting. And Gandhiji himself came on record and said that those who are supporting Bose have as much as a right to campaign for him as do those who are campaigning against him, saying that he still is very much part of the Congress family. So I think, and that is very clear also from the way he relates later to Gandhiji, calling him the father of the nation, Gandhi Brigade, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that the differences were, I think here, in my understanding, not ideological in terms of left versus right, but in terms of strategy, which is different from ideology. So whether this is the right time for a movement, whether the movement should be a non-violent movement or an armed movement, these are all issues of strategy, not ideology.
Correct.
So I think if one just distinguishes, and I think here Gandhiji is very firm on, and the Congress, did yield to him as it yielded till 42. Now, the converse is true in 1942, when Gandhiji becomes adamant that you have to go in for a mass struggle, because he says the popular mood is anti-British, and it must be given an expression. Most of the leaders of the Congress were against it. Maulana Azad was against it, Rajagopalachari was against it, Nehru was against it. They did not think we should be opposing the British in a mass movement. But Gandhiji persuaded everybody over a matter of a few months through, obviously, evidence, and look what happened. It was a massive revolt. And that's, again, my one quarrel with you about the way you refer continually to the Quit India movement without understanding, I think, or giving it its full significance. Because you see it, I think, as something that was suppressed in a few months' time. But INA also, they had no real chance of victory, and as you yourself argue in your book, they lost. But the real significance of INA is not that they lost. The significance is what happened later. So again, for 42, I would argue that what 42, the Quit India movement did, and by the way, at an underground level, it lasted well into till 44, 45. There were parallel governments in different parts of India. Then there was the whole underground network which got set up by the Congress Socialists. And also, very interestingly, on the whole issue of violence, which is where you think there were fundamental differences between Gandhiji and the Congress and Bose, just look at how Gandhiji reacts to the violence of 1942. There's widespread violence by the people in 1942, and he's in jail. And every evening, a government official goes to Gandhiji in jail with a dossier saying, these are the instances of violence, and please condemn it. And they're sure that he will condemn it. And every day this happens. And the old man refuses to say a word against the violence which daily is going on before his eyes. And the only statement he makes at the end of that long story is, the violence of my people was an answer to the leonine violence of the British state. He refuses to condemn the violence. So I think even when we're talking about violence and non-violence, these kind of binaries, which we suppose are there, are perhaps not really. There were many Gandhians who participated in the violence of 1942. That doesn't mean they started believing in violence as an alternative. But at that moment, so they would also understand INA as something that was specific, contextual, and therefore legitimate, which in no way then decries the fact that the national movement had been one based on the issue of non-violence. That didn't delegitimize it, just as violence doesn't delegitimize the INA or the Quit India movement of 1942. So these are sort of, more, in a sense, more complex, the relationships between these ideas and the ideologies and strategies.
If I may just add a few points to what you've said, I am convinced that the differences between Nehru and Bose were largely tactical and in terms of strategy, because both belonged to the left, undoubtedly. And you've also very correctly said that the left had a momentum from the fact that Nehru had been president for 2 years, and then Bose becomes president for 2 years. And this is testified by the fact that when it came to a contest, Bose won. So he defeated, so the organization itself had moved to the left. But where Bose was finding it difficult was in the working committee, which was still dominated by a lot of right-wing people. Now, I differentiate between Gandhians and the right. And so between Bose and the right, there was certainly an ideological difference. You could say that with Gandhi, perhaps not so much, because Gandhi also was able to take a broader view in retrospect, and certainly his praise of the INA. Even the fact that he had escaped from India, Gandhi marveled at his daring and the fact that he had left the country disguised as a Pathan. And so, yes, I think apart from that stage where Gandhi put his foot down and didn't want to give him a second term, and also I felt democratically elected president was ousted. That was perhaps not correct. But other than that, I think they were all in the same camp, and the camp was seeking the freedom of India.
Right. Well, why don't we take some questions from the audience? I'm sure there are people who would like to ask you. Nobody? I'm sure there's someone who'd like. Yes, please. Please. Yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Mike. There's one there if somebody can. I think that might work. Is it working? It may just switch it on, I think. Ankush, can you just see the mic? Now I think.
So at the
Hello, hello.
Ankush, yes.
so at the end of the day, was it violence that gave us our independence, or non-violence that gave us our independence? Because it would appear from your presentation, and I must say it's extremely convincing, that in many ways the immediate architect of India's freedom was Claude Auchinleck, who tells the British that we can't control this country anymore because we can't control the army. And we can't control the army because the INA has made such a deep impression on the people of India that even Nehru says that nothing else has impressed the last Indian in the last village as much as Bose's INA. So was eventually, as I think Attlee has claimed, that it was nothing that the Congress did that resulted in freedom. It was eventually the impact of the INA on the Indian Armed Forces that forced the British to understand that they no longer controlled the country, and that if they didn't quit, there would be massacres, possibly involving the British population of India at that time. I'd like you to, I'm not arguing a point. I'm trying to put a point to you that others have also put, but without the deep study of the INA and its impact on India that you appear to have undertaken at Oxford.
Well, let me put it like this. I have maintained throughout, and in course of my book, that the foundation of the Indian freedom movement was laid by the Gandhian movement, and there's no arguing with that. It converted, if you agree, Professor, that it converted what was an elitist movement into a mass movement. And without that foundation, there would be no freedom. But it is also true that at a critical juncture, that winter of 1945-46, the Congress Party embraced the INA, which it had reservations about earlier. And so at a critical juncture, because the mood of the people was such, the armed forces were reacting in a certain way, and therefore the Congress quite rightly felt that this was an opportunity. Now, I give the Congress credit for this, because you might say, as that final statement by Nehru quite rightly says, and I love one thing about Nehru, his honesty, and the fact that he tells the truth on matters which could even be held against him. And so he says that people think that we have exploited the INA issue. And then he explains that that was not what we started out as. But then this groundswell of public opinion, that the grumblings within the armed forces, that certainly changed the situation. And even in the AICC session in Mumbai in September 1945, that is where the Congress took a stand on this, because public opinion had already developed by that stage. The war ended on the 15th of August 1945, and so the censorship was lifted soon after. And the people of India, for the first time, came to know about the INA. They were very angry for being kept in the dark. That's one. Secondly, they were outraged by the fact that people they thought to be patriots, namely the soldiers of the INA, were going to be put on trial. So they were very much against that. And so these two factors, I think, fell on the Congress's lap, because when the Congress leaders came out of prison in August and September 1945, they were looking for, as I said, I went to Oxford to ask this question: how is it that the freedom movement was revived? And this literally fell on their laps, and they ran with it. And in that scenario, I think I wouldn't ever say that violence brought us freedom. But what I would say is this, that it did provide, the threat of violence did provide a catalyst. And this was a continuation of the freedom movement, which had been largely Gandhian in its character. But in that critical phase, unfortunately, the unity that we saw in those 5 months between Hindus and Muslims frittered away. And as you know, by August 1946, Hindus and Muslims were slaughtering each other in Calcutta. But the same Hindus and Muslims in November 1945 had rioted in unison against the British. So, I mean, if I've been able to.
As you very correctly pointed out, for the entire duration of Gandhi's domination of the Congress Party, starting from 1919 and continuing up till 1946, the foundations had been laid in a non-violent way, and the agitations, several of them, had also taken place in a non-violent way. And the philosophy of non-violence had seeped to the people. Then in September 1945, the Congress embraces the INA, notwithstanding the fact that it is an instrument of violence. Did that have anything to do with the last ghastly year of the freedom movement, which saw Indians inflicting violence on each other? All the rioting that took place from August 16th into about September, October 1947, and in the East Wing in 1949-50 as well, was this because the cap on violence was removed when the Congress embraced the INA? What is the connection between that and the sudden outburst of unprecedented violence that accompanied the independence and partition of India? How did a totally non-violent people suddenly become beasts and not human beings?
If I may just initially give you a response, but I'll wait to hear from you on your analysis and assessment. This period of 1939 to 1945 created an empty playing field for communal forces. They ran amok. And during that period, the relations between the Hindus and Muslims in particular went from bad to worse. So it was very much there, simmering in the background, if you like. However, because of the fact that the three who were put on trial were a Muslim, a Hindu, and a Sikh, India came together in a kind of unity which has possibly not been seen before or after in the 20th century. And it lasted only a few months. And that said, that what was simmering in the background came to the fore. And there was one particular, I would say, incident which actually started the matter to go downhill. There was, most of the INA accused were defended by the Congress. But the Muslim League had also set up a defense committee. And so some Muslim officers chose to be defended by the Muslim League. And in one instance, there was this officer, Captain Abdul Rashid, who was defended by the Muslim League, and he was given a sentence of a few months for brutality, not treason, because treason had been withdrawn from among the charges after this fiasco of the first trial. And now, once this man, Captain Rashid, receives a sentence of a few months, then Muhammad Ali Jinnah is up in arms. He cries foul. He says the British are biased towards the Congress and against the Muslim League. Look at this, that they have let Shahnawaz Khan, Prem Sehgal, and Dhillon go free, but they have punished a man defended by us. So that was the beginning of this, again, souring of relations. And unfortunately, on or around the 12th of February 1946, riots took place in Calcutta where Muslims rioted against the authorities. So it's a slightly complex situation, and as I said, very much against the grain, the Congress embraced the INA. But then the INA had caused such a stir among people that it was unavoidable for the Congress not to recognize the importance of the INA. And obviously, the trial became such a central element in the life of the nation that there was no way the Congress could have avoided defending those officers, and which was the right thing to do. But, Professor.
Yeah, I would just take you back. I mean, I would tell the story a little differently, which is that, one, as I would like to reassert, that we are forgetting the large-scale violence from August, September, October 1942 that happened in India. So this notion of first encounter with violence, that, you know, there was no ever sanctioning or, you know, and the Quit India movement is a Congress-led movement. It's the call given by Gandhi. It is the
Kuch karenge ya marenge.
it's the pinnacle of the freedom struggle. It is the great revolt, you know. And nowhere does any congressman, including Mahatma Gandhi, ever disown the Quit India movement. I think we are forgetting that. So this whole, as I said, binary which we are projecting between non-violence and violence, and then trying to understand their acceptance of INA as something so new and drastic. Let me again say that during the whole period from 42 to 45, firstly, there is the open rebellion, which is the first 3 months, all right, in which 10,000 Indians are killed in the brutal suppression. So it's a massive violent revolt that happens in India, all right. You don't kill 10,000 people to suppress a very mild rebellion. After that, led by the CSP leaders, the Congress underground, and some of them are not even CSP. Usha Mehta, for example, in Bombay, who runs the Azad Hind Radio, she's not a socialist even, you know. She's just a young Gandhian congresswoman. So there's this whole, and there are many Gandhians involved in the underground movement who carry on active sabotage of communications. Trains are derailed, communications are cut, and this goes on from 1942 till well into 1945. JP runs away. He runs away from jail. He's in Nepal. Aruna Asaf Ali is in the underground. She's Nehru's darling. He finally is telling her, please, you can come overground, give up, etc. But what I mean is that they are in touch with Gandhi. We have evidence to show that much before August of 1942, there were discussions that had taken place between Sardar Patel and Congress socialists, where everybody understood that the way the situation is, it's a time of war. British are not going to allow a peaceful movement. The leaders are going to be picked up and thrown into jail. There is bound to be widespread violence. They were prepared for it. It was not that they didn't know or anticipate that this was going to happen. Patel, we have interviewed people who told us that Patel said this is going to be, he called the communists and the leftists, and he said this is going to be your kind of movement, not our kind of movement that's going to happen. They knew it, you know. So what I'm saying is that these are not where we look for why the Congress accepted it. I think the broader issues in which they come out very well in your book, I think, where you have so many quotations, for example, from Nehru, and you have given extensive instances of the public reaction. You know, the massive scale on which the support INA movement grows. And as you have shown, the Congress was at the helm of it. You see, it is not a movement which is there and which Congress is therefore forced to, or they are exploiting, or this. Firstly, it is a movement which they are promoting. Nehru's at the helm of it. He's going everywhere and talking about INA. As you yourself said, every meeting he says, Jai Hind and Delhi Chalo. What more sanctioned? And he is the preeminent mass leader of the Congress at this time. Gandhiji, since non-cooperation, never did the public mobilization. It is always Nehru's job, that who does the public mobilization, you know, election campaigns and everything. Let me also say that I accept your point about hastening off the decision, final decision. That, you know, that's a matter of timing.
At least speech.
That's a matter of timing. Okay, but I think it's important to go back and say that July, when the Congress leaders are released and the Shimla conference is held, what is the Shimla conference about? It's about deciding the future of India. Issue of whether dominion status or independence, I think, is totally irrelevant. That is a minor technical issue. And let me remind you that even in the end, in 1947, the act which was passed, it said in dominion status because we didn't have a constitution of our own. So the moment we had a constitution, it became full independent. But these were not the issues. I think the issue was if you see, you have not seen the correspondence during the Quit India period, maybe. But the transfer of power correspondence, which is there in the transfer of volume, shows very clearly that assessing the Quit India movement, the British government came to the conclusion we cannot continue in India. So after the war ends, it has to be now negotiations for handing over power. Now, how those negotiations will go, whether they take 6 months or 1 year or 1.5 years. Now, as late as 1947, the British said June 1948 is when we will leave. It's Mountbatten who comes, sees the situation on the ground, and I think what the most saddest story of British rule in India is how they leave and decide to just run and not take responsibility when they see the situation, communal situation is deteriorating on the ground. But then he advances it to August of 47 for reasons of their own. So the actual timing, is a matter of conjunctural circumstances, contexts, and all that. But the main issue, you see, you somewhere, and here I'll argue with you, you have a presumption that Congress is looking for issues to launch a movement, revive the freedom struggle after the war. No. The deed of winning independence has been done. Quit India had done that. The British had accepted they will leave. Now it's a matter of just working out the modalities. But elections have to be fought. They are going to fight elections. INA issue comes up. And like good politicians, like good leaders, if you listen to people and ride the popular wave, that is not the same as exploiting. It's not also the same as looking for a cause, not finding anything. INA comes back, it goes against your grain, and still you accept it. That's not how it is. As Nehru, I think, very honestly says, that we were concerned about the fate of all these soldiers who had fought for India in good faith. They were patriots, and we didn't want them to suffer. And then, of course, the cause, what he says also very honestly is that it touches popular consciousness in a much stronger way than they had ever anticipated. Now, see, that's the other thing about mass movements. Nobody ever knows how far they will go and how deep. But that doesn't mean that it was something which was, the Congress accepted it against its grain to exploit it for political purposes. I would not sort of say that.
No, I don't think I say that.
Use
no,
those
I don't.
words.
I don't
know
say
you
that.
Don't.
But
and you argue against
yeah.
it.
But
there is an element where you are looking for why do they,
But you're correct in saying that I do make the point that after the war, the Congress was looking for
and I'm saying the story
how
was
to
over.
revive. I will just add one thing which I've said in the book, that the Congress passed its Purna Swaraj resolution in 1929. Now, the British paid no attention to that up to 1942, when the Japanese had arrived at India's doorstep, which is when Stafford Cripps comes here and he offers dominion status. Now, that is rejected by the Congress because the Congress position is Purna Swaraj, complete independence. Now, the Labour Party manifesto of the July 1945 election is also dominion status. So the point that I have tried to make is, now it could be a matter of semantics, but it is, I think, important in the sense that on the day the trial began, which is the 5th of November, 1945, the British position was still dominion status. But in 18 weeks, that is on the 15th of March 1946, Clement Attlee announces in the House of Commons that if India wants complete independence, then she has a right to have it. So this is the point that is the fundamental point I make, that this is the first instance of Britain, and from the pedestal of the British Prime Minister, saying that independence, you may have it. Whereas the position from 1929 was being ignored. From 42, of course, they did concede dominion status, but then it changed.
The Cripps offer did not fall through on the issue of dominion status. I'm sorry to disagree with you. There were many other elements in it on which were not acceptable to the Congress about what was to be the interim government. They wanted to be part of the government and all those things. It was not the issue of dominion status versus independence. I said it was that clearly is. I said even at the end we got dominion status. So as some people,
Yeah, I mean, technically we
as
did,
some people in fact do argue stupidly today that we were not really independent on 15th August 1947 because we got dominion status. You know, so how irrelevant that issue was, where the substance of independence, that's a mere technicality. The constitution process had been set into motion. So obviously the constitution that was going to come was going to be independent India's constitution. You know, it was not going to be. There are people there who have been raising their hands here.
Well, it's a good point. It's been quite heatedly debated over the years. They were cashiered, and therefore a decision was taken that they wouldn't be taken back. This happened in Pakistan as well, where they were not taken back into the Pakistan army. As I said, it has been heatedly debated.
Rakesh?
But they were cashiered. That is they were by the Indian Army, yes.
Yes.
So he had pneumonia at Tripuri, the second. No, I know that. He had, so he was ill, and he went. One of his brothers lived in Jamadoba, and that's where he went to recuperate. And in fact, the correspondence with Nehru takes place when he's recuperating, which I think was a very emotional exchange of letters. But it also showed that they may have disagreed, but at the same time, it was a very cordial exchange of letters, and always saying yours affectionately, because that was the fundamental relationship. But having said that, now he, of course, Bose was, although he was disappointed. He was naturally disappointed with what had happened at Tripuri. He couldn't deliver his address, by the way. His address was delivered by his elder brother, Sharad Bose, at his presidential address, which also brings me to one point which I should make, that in that September 1945 AICC session in Mumbai, one of the heroes of that session was Sharad Bose. Sharad Bose was a very important leader at that time, and therefore to embrace the INA, he played a very important role. He was one of the main speakers at that AICC session in Bombay in September. And this was just 1 week after he had been released. He had been in prison for 4 years. He was in Kannur for 4 years, and he comes back to Kolkata and then goes to Mumbai for this session. But yes, so Bose is disappointed. And then, of course, he decides that he's going to step down because he's not going to continue on the terms which have been set, because a resolution had been passed that the working committee has to be formed in accordance with Gandhiji's wishes. And so the die was cast, as it were, and so a special session was called in Kolkata. Interestingly, Nehru was again staying at Sarad Bose's residence, and the crowd in Kolkata naturally was quite foul towards the visiting leaders, and they were naturally enraged by the fact that their hero is going to step down. And as I said, Nehru did offer a compromise formula which Bose did not accept. And so this period, apart from the letters, when you say he fell silent, it was partly because he was recovering from illness. I mean, and that is my interpretation. I mean, if it was, I don't know whether, if you, would you, Sharmila, know why he was, I don't have, frankly have a reason as to why he would have fallen silent. I mean, he did communicate with Nehru as far as these letters were concerned. But he did. But the fact is that, you know, this principle of complete independence was established by March 1946. So I think that's quite important in the sense that the British had resisted conceding specifically in those terms. There's even a radio address by Wavell after he returns from London, when the new government is formed, he returns to Delhi, and there's a radio address where he avoids the word independence. And Gandhiji points this out, that the word independence is missing from the address. So this was an issue for the Congress, because the Congress had passed this resolution in 1929. So for them, I think there was an element of satisfaction when Attlee announced that India may have independence in March 1946. Of course, the dice rolled on till 47, but the fact is that was the first example, first instance that we have of the British at any consequential level saying or conceding Purna Swaraj.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one thing.
Yeah. I wanted to ask one thing. Like during INA movement, suddenly why all political parties took interest in the trial? Suddenly Congress panel also came, Congress panel also came. Why suddenly everyone came took initiative like we will conduct that way? What was the reason why everybody took interest?
It touched everybody's heart, every section of the people. Now, the fact is that the Hindu Mahasabha, as it then existed, did not set up a defense committee. The
But they
Muslim
approached-
League did.
But they approached.
But there were many parties. There was no political party practically in India who were not supporting or not opposing the trial. Let me put it this way. That's absolutely right. From all corners. Yes, of course, because now that's a very good point, because the INA was a completely secular force, and therefore they chose the Congress to defend them. No, Unsung didn't exist then, but the Hindu Mahasabha did. But Hindu Mahasabha did not get into defending anybody.
Because Subhash Bose had said to the INA that when you enter the territories of India, Mahatma Gandhi will be your commander-in-chief. Don't forget that statement of Bose. Even while fighting as an INA, he said, the moment you enter the territories of India, it is Gandhiji will be your commander-in-chief. So he never pitted them against his force against the Congress or against Gandhi. On the contrary. So that's why they knew that these are the natural allies. Yes, please.
You know, this is one of the tactical, I would say, dreams of the Japanese and the INA was that the British would capitulate, and that then the Japanese and the INA would capture their arms, their medical supplies, and their food supplies, and thereby move forward. And that, I think, was in terms of a strategy. But you know, they did fight and they defeated the INA. So resources was a problem. Yes.
I just wanted to make.
I say I catalyst. No, I would agree with you. And that is exactly what I say, that it hastened the event of the trial. Because my book is on the trial. And on that one central trial. And that one central trial certainly hastened acceptance of the principle of complete independence.
One more point. Which you made that Nehru, I have a great admirer of the Congress and Nehru, but his role in the INA trial was important. My mother would be very upset if you said you were the unsung hero of that INA trial. I have to say this on behalf of my mother. Because he really had no role. I mean, maybe in the public meetings and arousing sympathy and all that, I'm not saying. But in the actual INA trial, he had no role.
No, he's the one who gave the title Unsung Hero, not me.
I thought because it's being held
said
in,
his
I
role
thought
was
it's being
symbolic.
held here at Jawahar Bhavan. That's why the title came.
I
Ashish,
said
No,
his role
but
was symbolic.
no, the point is, no,
Okay.
I think
I made my point. No more.
It is absolutely true, which I've very clearly stated, that there was only one lawyer who argued the case. Only one lawyer. There were 17 lawyers. Out of the 17, only one argued the case. That it goes without saying. But the fact is that it was a twin operation.
Yeah,
There was an operation in the courtroom,
that's right.
and there was an operation as far as the public was concerned. And when it came to stirring the public, that is what I call as Nehru's role.
Well, as he's saying, the trial is not just the courtroom trial. It's the impact of the trial that's going on, what's happening. As I said, bringing it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Although he actually is quite modest about it in his final
yeah,
statement,
yeah.
saying that, no organization, no matter how strong, how efficient, could have done this, this enormous reaction that takes place. But I think that's where he's being a little modest, although it's also true that, as Mehrdullah said, that, sometimes you cannot predict these situations as to how they develop and how they evolve and, become a mass reaction.
No, this is the same thing. You see, some people, because in the Quit India movement, in the first sweep itself, the entire leadership of the Congress, not only at the national level, but at the provincial and of any consequence at the district level, is immediately put into jail. But there is a huge rebellion that happens. Some historians have actually argued that Gandhi and Congress had nothing to do with the Quit India rebellion because they were in jail and people did it all on their own. Now that takes away from the previous 50-year-old history of the national movement, and you don't understand how things happen. Things don't happen because you're sitting on the spot and saying, do this. It is the preparation you have made, it's the training that's gone on, it's what's happened in people's minds over the decades, and how you have prepared the people. That call that Gandhiji gave at Bombay, at the Gowalia tank, that speech he gave before being put into jail, where there were two crucial slogans. One was do or die, karenge ya marenge, and the second was quit India. So 3 words and 2 words. And he also said, it is very likely, though I will wait on the Viceroy, I will write him a letter, I will not declare the movement, but it is very likely that none of this will happen. We may be picked up. Each member of the Congress, each person becomes their own master. He gave full indication. You just have to read that speech. He gave it in English, he gave it in Hindi. If you spend 2 hours reading that speech, he has given the call for rebellion, and anybody who understands knows what it's all about. And people of India were listening carefully to what Gandhiji was saying in the middle of the war in an open meeting in Bombay, Gowalia tank, where gatherings of 5 are not allowed, thousands of people collect. The rebellion has already started. And yes, they are swept, but to say that Quit India, Congress had nothing to do with Quit India, it's like same thing to say that because Nehru says that nobody can go and, create something like this, no organization. And
That there
of
was an
course, what
organization.
actually happened in Quit India, nobody could have predicted what will actually happen. But you know the broad contours of what are going to happen, and you know the call you're giving. But whether it will erupt more in Berhampur, or whether it will erupt more in Cuttack or here or there, that's the popular, that's what mass movements are about. It's about people and their will as well. But that doesn't mean leadership doesn't play a role. It doesn't mean the organization doesn't play a role. I mean, that Bose, do we say Bose is not important in INA because it was the will of the soldiers and their patriotism? Both are equally important, you know. There has to be that energy from within, and there has to be the leadership and the, you know, the quiet preparation and the boring part of building a mass movement and building an army that goes on. It's all part of that. So the same way for the freedom struggle as for INA, all are important there. Yes, please.
Okay.
Please, last.
Okay.
I don't think we've left
Okay,
out
thank-
anyone. Yes, go ahead.
Just quickly, so regarding when regarding the Tripuri Congress of '39, what was the was Gandhiji when his difference with Bose at that time during the in 1939, was it only based? And I'm not talking about the right wing because there was certainly an ideological difference with the right wing. But with Gandhiji, was there a difference only on whether to start a mass struggle there, or were there other issues also with which there were differences between Bose and Gandhi during that Congress? That is one thing. And just a second part, that what about Jawaharlal Nehru's, because we talked about, and there's a lot of controversy on whether INA was talked about much after independence when Nehru was Prime Minister for almost 17 years. So could you just give a brief highlight of what was exactly was the government's role, Nehru government's role, or maybe later Congress government's roles in sort of talking about INA or of propagating what they stood for during that period, just in the recent decades after independence?
Well, I think that the Congress played a very important part, a very important role in terms of whipping up public emotions connected with the trials. So that perhaps has not been reflected as publicly, as widely as could have happened. But that I would leave you to analyze. But certainly, I feel that the Congress played a part, and that was not the intention of writing the book. My pursuit was to find out as to whether, and having come to this trial episode, to find out how important a role this trial played in hastening the acceptance. And that was my fundamental approach. And I think the evidence that I've been able to unearth does indicate that, yes, that it played an important role. But the Congress, if there's any political party, I mean, by far, there's no comparison. If there's one political party which was absolutely synonymous with the INA sentiment, the INA phenomenon, it was the Congress party.
Okay.
Just on differences, any other difference between Gandhiji and Subhash Bose during 1939, other than whether to go for a mass struggle during the war outright?
No, that came later actually. What Professor Mukherjee was referring to, that in 39, when Britain declared war on Germany and the working committee meeting took place, at that working committee, Subhash Bose did suggest a mass movement there and then. And that actually happened in 1942. As far as the renomination, re-election of Bose is concerned, there were differences of a different kind. And as I said, the Gandhians and the right wing were opposed to re-electing Bose as president. Bose also did look around and ask people in the left movement as to whether anybody from the left would stand. Nobody did. So he stood himself and he won. And as I have made the point, that it proved that in the Congress organization, the organization had moved in a left of center direction with Nehru and Bose as leaders. But I think what Bose felt in his first term was a hurdle in the working committee, which was somewhat right dominated.
If I can just one or two lines. I think there was also a difference between the way Subhash Bose understood the position of the Congress president and what actually had been the practice of the role of the president for the year. You see, the Congress president was elected just for that 1 year. And he was not meant to be somebody who took decisions, by himself or, made Gandhiji's role was always there as the supreme leader. There was a working committee which reflected very different viewpoints. And I think the feeling that's what I remember also from the correspondence between Bose and Nehru, where Nehru at times points out to Subhash that, the way you have been criticizing what you call the right-wing leaders, and you have been questioning their patriotism, and you've been questioning their anti-imperialism.
Compromise walas, he said.
That's right, compromise. He said, I also disagree. That's not fair. They may be right-wing, but they are anti-British. And see, so Bose also had certain angularities, and he had certain, as I said, way of working, where Nehru, as I said, the difference therefore is not ideology, because Nehru also had a very sharp, clear-cut leftist ideology. But the manner in which Nehru succeeded in working with the right wing, I would say Bose, because of various reasons, failed to do so. Now it's not a question of passing judgment on whether he was right or wrong, but simply to understand the situation. Like on this issue of him having the right to appoint 2 people, but accepting some more people in the working committee. You see, you have to also understand that the Congress policy of working, if you look at its entire history, had been one of slow consensus and conciliation, moving forward, moving a little backward, taking everybody along. You couldn't expect Gandhiji now to suddenly disown the right wing or Gandhians. And if Bose, for whatever reason, had managed to let them all gang up against him, somewhere, I think there was also that problem. And also we have to understand he'd been away from Congress politics for very long. He was in jail for most of the 30s,
Yeah.
From 31.
Even the 20s.
Even the 20s.
Because he was in Mandalay.
He was in Mandalay.
Yeah.
And then they put him in jail. He was not well. So they gave him the choice that either you go abroad or you stay in jail. So he goes abroad. So he's in Europe till what, 38, 37?
36.
36.
Yeah.
And he comes back only after that. So he's been away also for and so the inner workings of the Congress and this and that, I think there's also he's not quite at home with how to actually maneuver his way within the organization. So all this adds up, to, if you are not looking for heroes and villains, but trying to understand why it happens, then I think we have to bring in all these factors,
The thing about having so many scholars in one room is that the conversation is so engaging, you don't want it to end, which is exactly what I think we've all been witnessing today. But I want to take out some time and first thank you all for taking out time on a working day and coming and attending this event. I think that shows our commitment towards having this kind of dialogue, which is very necessary. The second thing is that, because so many discussions have happened around Nehru, one of the objectives of rediscovering Nehru as our theme for this year was also to not look at Nehru only hagiographically, but also to critically engage with Nehru and his life and lots of things that he's done. And I think all of these conversations that have been happening are steps towards applying that strategy and not falling in the trap of deifying somebody and looking at somebody only as one thing. One of my favorite things, of course, that Nehru has ever written is a piece that he wrote as Chanakya. We don't need more Caesars, which is when he was chosen the president of Congress again. And I don't think any politician in today's time has the candid nature, and the openness and the you know, the way in which he's able to write about himself, I don't think any person, any political figure today would be able to do that. So that is something that I treat as a takeaway from this. Of course, I would like to thank both the author of the book, Ashish Reji, and Professor Mudra Mukherjee, you know, who have come here today and graced us with their presence, but also with this fantastic conversation and all the people who have asked questions and engaged with this subject. I think this is a conversation that should go on. So we really hope that, you know, we will be able to organize more such events and have you all here. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone.